Oh, hello? Hmm?
Hello.
Oh, can you say something?
Can you hear me okay?
Hmm. Is our volume on?
How about
Al,
now?
could you say something again?
Sure. How about now? Can you hear me okay?
I can barely hear her.
Let me just make sure that my microphone
Oh,
is.
there we go. Oh, there we go. No,
Oh,
it was on our side.
It was us. We
oh, okay.
might actually want to turn
Hi,
you
Al.
down.
How are
There
you?
we go.
I wanted to try the co-host swap off to see if we can get that to work.
Oh, sure.
Do you want me to pause recording?
Yes.
Yeah.
6 p.m.
Okay, 6 p.m. So we need to take on the consider. Kevin, you want to do the roll call?
Yes, Mayor Sean Reardon,
Here.
City Council President Heather Shand, James Conley,
Here.
Karen Cullinan,
Yeah.
Gary Gorski,
Here.
Jen Patch, Dyke Henderson,
Here.
Caroline McCarthy,
Here.
Stephen Moore, Kristen Shea,
Here.
Sarah Spalding, and Madeline Whitten.
Sarah is here.
Oh, Sarah's here.
Must
Oh,
be up there.
She's on audio only. Oh,
Sure.
there she is.
oh, thank you, Sarah.
Then did you want to make introductions, Kevin?
Yes, tonight we have online a one of the library advisory specialists, Al Hayden. And over in the corner here, we have Christina, and I'm sorry, Christina, and Mina Macarius, and they are with Anderson Krieger.
Do we have any public comment? Anyone? Yes, there's no public comment. Next meeting date will be September 16th. And then I guess, Kevin, you want to talk about our board of directors training or? how do you want to-
Yes, I'm gonna hand it over to Al Hayden and Mina, and they will going to take off on the training. And after that, there is one other agenda item that the mayor has requested. We'll discuss that at the end.
Al, do you want me to give a quick introduction and then launch into it? That's okay?
Yeah, I was actually just about to ask if you wanted to do that. So, sure.
Thank you. So, good evening, everyone. My name again is Mina Macarius. My colleague Christina and I, Anderson Krieger, we're with the new office. Actually, not so new anymore. It's been 6 months. So we're with the city solicitor's office. We were asked to come in and do a training on sort of a bunch of issues that library boards face. We're very fortunate that Al is available and has a wealth of information, as is her organization, on the sort of roles, responsibilities, best practices for library boards and commissions and staff across the Commonwealth. So she'll lead it off with that piece of it. We'll follow up with some of the unique features of your charter and ordinance setup. And when I say they're unique, but in some ways every library is unique. It has its own, a little couple of quirks in its charter, and yours certainly is no exception. And finish up with some sort of the basics around the open meeting law that might affect your work as library board members. I suspect for some of you, this is familiar ground, for some it may not be. But we thought we'd try to kind of cover it, as well as we have plenty of time throughout. I'll let Al decide sort of how she wants to handle for her portion, but certainly as we're going for questions and sort of talking about application to real life examples that you might feel. Without further ado, I'll turn to you.
All right, thank you so much. So hello everybody. I do want to thank Mina and Kevin for inviting me to offer an additional professional perspective. And I also want to thank all of you for your gracious accommodation and letting me be on Zoom this evening. So as Mina said, my name is Al Hayden. I am the Library Advisory Specialist here at the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners. Among my duties with the agency is working with library trustees to equip them with resources that prepare them to carry out their fiduciary responsibilities in support of their public library. So one very important note before we get started, I am not a lawyer. The lawyers are in the room with you. And the MBLC is not designed to govern libraries. What I am able to offer you are best practices, recommendations, and sort of a perspective on our professional ethics and protocols. So I want to make that clear that what I am offering cannot be construed as legal advice. And fortunately, you have a team right there that has information that can do that for you. So here's what I plan on talking about. I'll give you a very brief overview of the MBLC and what we do. I'll talk about trustee responsibilities. I will talk about differentiating them from the librarian or the library director responsibilities. I'll give you some perspective on which roles trustees play within a board. I'll give a brief mention of policy and bylaws. I know Mina had mentioned questions. I am not always great at monitoring like the chat or the screen when I'm giving a presentation. So if questions arise, feel free to give a shout out, interrupt me. I'm more than happy to clarify. I also will be happy to take questions at the end. So the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners, we are an independent state government agency. We were established in statute. Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 78, Section 14, creates the agency, the commissioner positions, and the agency director. We're governed by a similar structure as many of the public libraries in Massachusetts. There's a board of, in our case, they're called commissioners. We have 9 commissioners appointed by the governor whenever there's a vacancy. They act similar to a library trustee board. They hire and evaluate the agency's director and establish the rules and policies by which the agency runs. What I want to bring your attention to is our website. The link is listed at the top. This is the best place for our resources, our events, ways to get in touch with different staff members at the agency. I always encourage trustees to head to the gold bar on the top right of the page. I've got trustees there circled. That's a live link that'll take many of you, take you to our resources. That includes the full text of the official Mass Library Handbook for trustees, our trustee pocket guide, our resources page that has links to other information. And I will also point out the column on the right side of the page. That is the link to the agency's blog. You'll find news releases, updates about that in there. This is an older screenshot, so we have updated it since December of 2025. But I also periodically publish a series called Fortifying Your Library through the blog. That sort of does a individual deep dives into specific library policies, and I talk about some other topics that can strengthen a library's place in their community. But enough about us. Let's talk about you and what a board actually is and does. So Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 78, Sections 10 through 13 outline what a board is and what is expected of them in the care and keeping of their public libraries. In your particular case, what generally the MGL are referring to would be the 7 directors who are appointed by the mayor and serve out 7-year terms. It looked like they were alternating, so one each year. I also realized that you do have 5 ex officio members who are generally considered trustees. So I just want to clarify a bit on in terms of language. So for the core duties of library trusteeship, I am referring to the voting members who have jurisdiction over library policy. So I may occasionally refer to what you call the board of directors or directors as the library board or trustees. I will do my best to use your correct terms whenever possible, because I don't want to create unnecessary confusion, but I did want to make that clarification just so we can start off on the same page. I will also say there are many appointed library boards across the Commonwealth. There are a large number of elected boards and a decent amount of self-perpetuating boards. So that all depends on the library structure and governance. It looks as though, for the most part, you are a governing board in that you have ethical, legal, fiduciary responsibilities that include the hiring and evaluating the library director, referred to as librarian in your city codes, creating and revising administrative policy that governs the library, working with the municipality to act in the best interest of the library, and participating in the strategic planning process when the time comes to shape the future direction of your library. And if Mina or Christine, if I misspeak and say something that applies generally to trustees but not specifically to this board, feel free to interrupt me and correct me. But I believe all of the information I have here is in line with the city code. So the default in Mass General Law, Section 78, Chapter 78, Section 10, is an elected board. But Mass General Law also loves to keep people like me on their toes. Newburyport can be considered a board organized under a special act which is covered in Section 13. And that means that your city code is dictating a lot of your primary roles and responsibilities. So as I said, I've taken a look at the code. I've discussed it with Mina. So it looks like the basic descriptors that I gave you are applicable in Newburyport's case, just with a little bit of nuance. Before I get into, oh, yes.
Yeah, and just on that point, and we're gonna get into that a little bit more later, but one very tricky thing is that you sort of have more layers than your average city or town.
Yorkshire.
While in a lot of towns, select boards or city council might have a role vis-a-vis the board, the layering of it in Newburyport is actually something that I don't think either of us had seen quite in this form, where it makes it sometimes a little bit difficult to tell what's happening at this level versus the council level, which has a sort of supervisory authority. So as Al speaks, I think, think of it as sort of more about what actually happens on the ground for this board, and then we'll get into a little bit of where those distinctions may be under your charter.
Sounds good. I just want to point out before we sort of start diving into trustee responsibilities, I want to point out the Office of the Inspector General is a fantastic resource for board and commission members. I have their Attend OIG Academy listed here, and I've actually taken a couple of fantastic courses with them. So I recommend this to all library boards that I come across, but they have some great basic information on what it means to be a public body and a member of a commission in terms of roles and expectations. Those are from a overarching state perspective, but in most cases they do apply. And they also have a packet. I think it's a guidebook, or a handbook. They have a handbook that talks about being an effective board and commission member. I have those linked in our resources on the trustee page that I was telling you about at the beginning. So I do recommend them as as an additional resource for all of you. So what I have listed here are some of the ways that you are likely going to be carrying out those fiduciary responsibilities that you have. Sorry, my mouse wheel gets a little overexcited sometimes. Out of all of the responsibilities that a library trustee might have, the most important thing is knowing and understanding what is happening at your library. The best way to do this, be a library user. Know what your library is offering. If you are already on some sort of social media platform, be it Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, you don't have to pick up and learn something new, something that you're not comfortable with. But if you are already following along with social media, follow the library's social media. Educate yourself on the board's history in via past minutes. Sign up for the library's newsletter. I'm guessing, Kevin, that Newburyport puts out an e-newsletter with some regularity. So make sure that you are getting that in your inbox. If you are not already the board chair, get familiar with your board chair. And also make sure that you have a working functional relationship with Kevin. Most of that is going to be filtered through the board chair, but it is helpful to just be on casual terms with your library director so that you can be comfortable asking questions during a board meeting. Because if you're not understanding what your library is doing, that knowledge gap is going to color how you carry out your duties and will end up cascading into the decisions that you're making on behalf of the library. So I mentioned briefly about working with the municipality to achieve the library's best interest, which means your library is part of the library municipal structure. That is something that your code laid out pretty well, actually, even though some of the nuance there is a little bit vague. Successful directors are going to maintain a working relationship with their local government. So participate as much as you can in the whole political process. Understand municipal finance, what the local budgetary pressures are, what are some personnel concerns that may be happening. One of the best ways to get up to speed, if you're not already doing it, is attend the major municipal meetings, your city council meetings. Review of a few of the most recent minutes, just to get an idea of where Newburyport stands in terms of challenges, in terms of prioritizing. And that way you will get a better understanding of where and how the library can fit into that existing municipal structure. So considering that you've been appointed, I'm guessing you are at least casually familiar with the major players, the mayor, the council members, hopefully maybe some school committee members. Those can be fantastic allies for a public library. Keep in touch with them because that gets to be very important when it comes to advocating. And I'm using advocating here in terms of the lowercase a. The lowercase a version of advocacy, not the capital A lobbying kind of advocacy. But when it comes to advocating for your library, knowing the political players in town is going to be extremely helpful. And if you ever want to have a conversation about what you can do to help advocate for your library, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. Again, we're a government agency, little a advocacy, not big A advocacy. So I also mentioned library policy. So as a governing board, you are going to be the ones setting and revising your library's policies. And you have a responsibility to make sure that, at least to the best of your ability, your library is being funded and guided in a way that best serves its community. So policy is going to be what governs the library's operations. Quick note on that, because I'm a policy nerd and I can't help myself. Your policy should always be legally defensible. So have your town council, have Mina or Christine take a look at it before it is officially put into place whenever possible. And if you would like to nerd out with me on library policy at any time, feel free to reach out to me as well. So part of why it is so important to be active in your local politics is because you should be an active participant in reviewing the library's budget with your library director and making sure that you're able to back up your director when it comes to negotiating what part of the municipal budget your library is going to get. The degree that you will be successful on that is going to depend on a lot of different factors. I highly recommend taking a look at the two reports that the Mass Municipal Association put out at the end of last year. I think it was the Coming Storm and Navigating the Storm, something like that. But they're readily available on their website, and that kind of gives an idea of what municipalities across the Commonwealth are facing in terms of challenges, and some of the ways to overcome that. But I would definitely anticipate that you will need to have a solid overview of the financial situation of your library, what it costs to keep your library running, and what your library needs to keep serving your community at the high standard and the requirements that are necessary to keep your library certified. Traditionally, and it looks like this is also the case in your city code, you're responsible for hiring the library director, referred to as the librarian in your code, and providing the evaluations for that. I know Mina is going to talk extensively with you on this, but I always put in a little plug when conducting things like evaluations. Just keep open meeting law in the back of your mind, because there's surprisingly little that falls under the executive privilege exception. And the last thing you'll likely be responsible for at least being a part of is strategic planning. These usually run on a 3 to 5 cycle, and that's going to be your opportunity to take part in figuring out the overarching goals for your library and what activities the library can do to meet those goals. How it moves the library forward, how programs are aligned with the library's values. These are all a great opportunity for you to have input on where your library is going. It's also a great opportunity to reach out to your community, both to library users and people who aren't using your library. So I'll talk a bit more about the separation of duties in that in a few slides, but strategic planning is going to be where you will likely have the most input in terms of the day-to-day library operations. I'd also like to do a quick plug to mention that everything I've discussed in this slide could potentially be added to your bylaws. Again, this is something Mina's going to cover extensively, but I always recommend to any library board to have bylaws refer to them regularly, and to revise them, not necessarily frequently, but on a regular basis. So bylaws are a great way to make sure that everybody on the board is on the same page about what you are doing and what direction you're headed as a board. In many cases, not quite as much in your case, but in more cases, the city code, or the town charter or whatever, is really vague about what the library board should be doing. A lot of boards rely on Mass General Law, that Chapter 78, sections 10 through 13 that I mentioned. You've got more clearly defined roles in your city code, but in those places where your city code doesn't explicitly lay out all of the things that you should be doing, the bylaws are a really good opportunity to define your roles more clearly. You can break down whatever goes into it, decide how you want to approach them and what works for the board. Oops, sorry, my mouse went a little wonky again. Yes.
Back at the beginning, where you talked about the 7 appointed members of the board and then the 5 ex officio members. Could you
Mhm.
go that description again?
Us three, mayor.
Right, there was something that you said that wasn't sure of.
So that is, so that was the slide where I was referencing Chapter 78, the sections in Mass General Law that applies generally to library trustees. I use that as an opportunity to just clarify the language, to make sure that we're all on the same page. The other time, the part of the MGL that most specifically applies to you, is this section 13. The 3 preceding sections, so 10, 11, and 12, shall not apply to library associations nor to a library organized under a special act, which my understanding of that has always been, the state is leaving a lot of leeway up to their municipalities. So town charter, city code in your case, has overarching authority if the municipality would like to define the trustees' roles more fully than what's listed in the Mass General Law.
Maybe I can quickly just clarify just who that is. So that is this board. So under your city ordinance, and this derives from your, correct me if I'm wrong, the deeds that set up the library many years ago. You have 6 directors who are appointed. Then you have 3 members serving ex officio. It's the mayor, the city council, and this is in a bit. I think that's right. Thank you. Yeah, so that's what she was referring to.
Well, I thought she said that it was I think 7 appointed members, 6, but whatever.
Yeah.
Were the ones who were voting and had responsibility for evaluation, and the other people did not.
No, that I think the distinction, and Al, tell me if we're gonna get into this a lot more sort of in our section. But I think I was making the distinction that you have this, because of this dual layer that you have the council who provides budget, has sort of general superintendents of the building and making sure that there's enough for the library, but then this board, as a board, has a lot of that oversight. In terms of the distinct roles, is everybody voting?
That is open.
Yeah, so it's not set.
Decided.
Yeah, so if you've been voting, that's okay, that's the way to.
Yeah, we all have.
So the term ex officio means it goes with the office. A lot of times, ex officio members on boards, library and otherwise, and Al, tell me if you disagree, mean that they don't vote. So they hold that office and they don't. That's not necessarily always the case. So, the board has always had those members voting, there's nothing.
But we could decide they're not voting.
You would have to do that by bylaw or something. No, for instance, I'll give you an example of one of the towns I represent. The library director, I shouldn't use director, the equivalent of Ken.
Yeah.
The sort of head of the library, the staff, is actually a member of the library board under their system. She rarely, if ever, votes, and is actually, I think, sort of set up as a non-voting member, because virtually every decision affects her job, her staff's job, et cetera. So she sees her role as not necessarily voting, right? And so that's an ex officio that doesn't. All right, but
All right, we're good? Okay, yes, and yes, that is aligns with everything that I have been instructed or understood about ex officio. In most cases that I come across, an ex officio member is not a voting member. So, but again,
One more comment.
you have that sort of dual layer. So your situation is a bit unique.
One more comment. All three members of the building committee were at one time appointed members. I don't know if that makes any difference or not, but
So I'm sorry, so you said there were 3 members of the building committee?
yes.
Are they in addition to the 7 appointed by the mayor? Are those are those 3 the trust trustees, or are
The
these
building
3
committee
additional
is-
people?
The building committee is self-appointed, but at one point, we were all appointed by the mayor as members of the 7.
right, so yeah, so the members of the 7, so this is 6 members plus 1 registered voter. Not sure why the ordinances put it that way, by the way, because presumably we're all in the same boat. And we did not talk about this aspect of it. You also have this sort of additional letter, so actually you have more than 2 subscribers, and the subscribers, I think over time, as I understand it, have turned into the building committee. And you say building committee, correct me if I'm wrong, the library building.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Permanent city building, right?
Yeah.
And those are also members of. This, I guess, is actually a lot of things. That's why these waters don't be-
Are we good?
Yeah,
Okay. All right. So we talked about the overarching duties. So the methodology you're approaching this is generally going to be your monthly board meetings, outside of special circumstances. Pro tip, defining the frequency of your meetings and other parameters are something that has bylaw potential, let's say. So those may be some other things you would like to include in your bylaws. But these board meetings are your opportunity to get updated on the library's happenings over the course of the past month through the director's report. You can request to see where the budget is compared to where it's supposed to be, to see how much you've spent out of your overall budget. And that's your opportunity to discuss all of the materials that are in your board packet, which ideally should be distributed prior to your meeting. I believe that's the case with you as well. So just a few things to help keep the meetings on task and productive. It's a good idea to have an open line of communication with the head librarian. So talk to Kevin. Ask if they foresee any issues that the board should be aware of, if there are any capital campaigns that might be needed down the road, or shifts in who is using the library that might need policy adjustments or an expansion of library services. Make sure you have the agenda and that you stick to it. Not only is this going to keep your meeting on task, but you are obligated to follow it by open meeting laws. And Mina will get into that in much more detail. But the purpose of an agenda is not just to keep your meeting on task. It is to let the public know what you will be talking about so that they can decide whether or not to participate in public comment or to attend the meeting. So if you start straying from that agenda, then the public doesn't have a fair opportunity to consider whether or not they want to attend. You should be reading everything you receive prior to the meeting. Again, it helps keep the meeting on task, but it also ensures that you're going to be able to cogently discuss the materials in the packets. You will come with your questions prepared, and it also ensures that your perspective will get expressed during the meeting. And that can be extremely important when, as a board, you are going to be essentially speaking as one voice. So after a vote has been taken, that is the board's decision whether or not it has been unanimous. And again, you can define in your bylaws what defines a majority or how a vote will be considered as a passing vote. But once that vote is passed, whether or not you agreed with that decision in the moment, that's your time to get on board and send out that unifying message on behalf of the library. So make sure you read your board packet materials beforehand because you want your opinion to be not just on the record, but considered by your fellow trustees. And I'm very grateful that Mina will be talking about open meeting law, but I always mention it excessively, because it is such an important part of the overarching standards from the state that all public bodies are held to. I also make a note that when you're getting municipal funding, which you are because you are currently a certified library and receiving state aid from the MBLC. The open meeting law is a really good opportunity to demonstrate transparency so that you are garnering trust in your community. And it can also be really helpful in showing your community how well a library uses a budget. Libraries on average in Massachusetts have a 4.3% return, 430% return on investment in terms of the tax dollars that get invested into the library versus the amount of services, the sort of the estimated dollar value of the services that a library puts out and provides to the community at no additional cost except for that initial tax investment. So open meeting law is a great opportunity to show how well the library does in terms of being effective and spending those tax dollars, not just judiciously, but frugally and with the most impact possible. One of the biggest areas of confusion and what I get a ton of questions about in my capacity here at the agency is what is the line between a board director and the library's head librarian or the library director. If you became a trustee because you wanted to change the way the library works, have oversight on collections and programming and manage the way the staff is run or the budget is spent, this is going to be potentially very disappointing for you. Under most circumstances, those are the job of the library director. You as a board are in charge of governing the library, setting the policy that allows the library to function. The library director is in charge of carrying out the daily operations of the library and enforcing the governance that you as a board have set as closely as possible to the spirit of the policy that you put in place.
I'll just,
Um,
just be further, this is a good reminder to sort of explain, to remind folks that in Newburyport, your title, all of you, are directors, but when Al's talking about the director, she's actually talking about the head librarian.
Yes, so Kevin's job is the day-to-day operations of the library, managing the staff, managing the daily operations. Your job as a board is setting policy, among the other listings that I had on the previous slide. So let's look at some of the other duties that, under most circumstances, a head librarian, Kevin, is generally follows through. Overseeing the purchasing of collections, overseeing programming, executing and enforcing the policies that the board has set, liaising with municipal officials, managing library staff, managing the facilities, and spending according to the appropriate budget lines. This can make for a very interesting dynamic because as the board of directors, you are the boss and you're responsible for ensuring that Kevin is carrying out his duties effectively. But if you start injecting yourself into daily operations, then you're not necessarily letting the director or the head librarian do their job. And that can create tension, which is why early on I had mentioned working closely together and keeping those lines of communication open and frequent can sort of build up that mutual respect and trust. So you can create a balance between your desire to keep the library running and trusting the experienced professional that you hired to do the job without extremely close supervision. So the board may have people on it who are familiar with some of the duties listed on the slide. Personnel and facilities management are actually pretty common skills with people that we find on board members. They're HR professionals. They've done construction or some kind of facility management. Another common one is accountants. So they've got a basic fundamental understanding of budgeting and finance and that sort of thing. But I strongly recommend keeping a couple of these 2 points in mind. So the first of which is this list of duties taken all together in the context of a library is a very different environment from a strictly for-profit or even a strictly not-for-profit organization, and even from a governmental standpoint. And the second point is that it's generally best practice to have a head librarian who has been professionally trained, ideally in possession of a master's degree in library science, or at least having the basic library skills training offered by the Mass Library Systems. It's very common for somebody to look at the people working the circulation desk at the library and think, oh, I mean, that's basic customer service. I can do that. But library work is specialized, and it's generally best accomplished by trained professionals. The trustee's perspective, especially when it brings the broader community perspective into the board meetings, is incredibly valuable and incredibly important. But it is also a lay perspective. And the library tends to work much more smoothly when you recognize that your head librarian is the one giving you the professional library perspective. Let's see, as Mina said, you've got a very interesting dynamic mentioned in the city code. There are a couple of things mentioned that generally I would consider to have fallen under the duties of the librarian in charge of the library as opposed to the board. Um, just because it's best practice, to follow those things out under the guidance of professional library standards. For example, the collection development and management in the library. That's best addressed by somebody who has been trained in the nuance and the professional ethics of librarianship. So just another plug here. Those duties can be further defined in your bylaws. For example, bestowing collection and development day-to-day duties to the librarian, with the board retaining the responsibility of ensuring appropriate, sufficient, municipally appropriated funds devoted to collection maintenance. So some of those things to consider as you continue on. So as I said, the dynamic between the library board and the director can definitely be more complicated than the board being the boss and the head librarian being the employee. So this is a bit more of a graphic representation of what a local library ecosystem looks like. Your community, your head librarian, you as a board, you're all working to inform each other based on what your special role with the library is. If we break down the key areas of library governance, policy, management, budget, politics, here's where everybody sort of falls in this table here. So if we take patron behavior policy as an example, the library board, with professional advice from the head librarian, approves a policy that follows best practice, professional standards, and ideally advice from your city council. The librarian is in charge of understanding the overall intentions and wishes of the board as expressed through that policy. Then the head librarian uses that knowledge to execute the policy, make sure it's being enforced, and if anything isn't working well in the library, to report back to the board and recommend any changes that will still allow the spirit of the policy to be recognized, but applied in practical ways that can be followed by everybody in the library. I always make a big plug for the library community benefiting from policy, because it's a big part of making the library an equitable, a comfortable, a safe space where all of the members of the community can exist. They are in turn responsible for following the policy, because when they're not, the library is no longer safe, equitable, and comfortable for everyone. So a
Can we
bit
go back-
more.
Can we go
Oh,
back to that slide?
yes, certainly.
When you were talking about policy, you said, the board vote finalize revise and review by city council. Did you mean city solicitor?
I'm sorry. Yes, city solicitor.
Okay. And
Yes.
Under the budget. It says municipal appropriations and trusts. What?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the trusts do not apply to the board as a whole. I believe you've got 3 members who are specifically dedicated to the library's sort of foundational trusts.
All of them?
Just
Just
one.
one, just a billion. But there are many other trusts and funding types of things that.
The city manages.
And the city council has a lot of role on structuring financial decisions. Yeah.
You say. They've been involved in municipal positions.
Yeah, so the municipal appropriations, those go through the budgetary cycle with the council. That's our municipal appropriations. There are some trusts, donations, et cetera, that you may have more control over, but typically I think in your structure, related to this as well, there's the, that's where the sort of role of the council and mayor as trustees comes.
Yeah, apologies. And I can update the slide and resend it so that you have it. But in the majority of my experiences with library boards, those sort of foundational trusts, like George Peabody gave to the Peabody, Danvers, and Georgetown libraries. Those are often managed by the library board. But the way that City Code has structured the library's governance in this particular instance, the trusts don't apply to you in that sense. So
Yeah.
does that help clarify?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Al, sorry, before we change from this slide, I
No,
just want to
that's
make sure I understand the distinction between setting policy, drafting it, finalizing it. In the past, the head librarian has brought us a draft, and then we
Yes.
review it, we provide our feedback on it, and then we vote on it. Just want to make sure that that's the proper order, the traditional order.
Those are the ideal circumstances. Yes. I have worked with boards who do not allow their head librarian that level of freedom and professional input. But yes, if Kevin is bringing draft policies to you for you to consider, add your perspective, revise as necessary, and sign off on, best practice says that's the way things should work.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see, Gus. All right. Are there any other questions before I move on to the next slide? All right, hearing none. So a little bit more about potential board roles. I have the vice chair on this slide in brackets, only because that is not required by Mass General Law. It does appear to be required by your city code. So you should have all of these four roles in play in your board. I believe Kevin is the designated secretary, and that's not, that doesn't come from among your ranks. But a secretary is required by Mass General Law and your city code. So, it's great if you have these in place. Mass General Law, and from what I understand, or what I was able to read of your city code, does not outline specifically what each of these roles is supposed to do. So those rely mostly on norms, standards, what work best for the board. Again, clarifying these roles is absolutely something that you can put in your bylaws. So some of the things that I have listed here are common roles that these positions within the board will carry. Those may not be the only roles that you do. Some of them may not be as relevant to you in terms of the duties that you're carrying out as a board. So again, suggestions, best practices, a great place to find additional recommendations for what a chair, a vice chair, a secretary, a treasurer should be doing, goes back to the Office of the Inspector General in one of my earlier slides. That will be in their boards and commission handbook, as well as some of the courses that they offer at that OIG Academy. In terms of committees and liaisons, generally speaking, a board chair appoints these. I do know of other library boards that it goes basically on a volunteer basis. But if you don't currently have any committees, it might be something to consider. It can make a board a bit more efficient by having just a few dedicated people. And this is where some of the professional expertise of people on the board can really come in handy. The library where I was library administration before I came to the MBLC, we had a couple of small business owners, one of whom was extremely adept in building and grounds. So he was always the head of the Building and Grounds Committee, and he was a great resource for the library because he could say, no, that what's going on over there in that building, that corner of the building, yeah, that's not up to code, or, that needs to be fixed, or, hey, I did a walk around the perimeter of the library and found that the gutter is falling off the side of the building, and that is a true story. So these are some considerations. This is by no means an exhaustive list. It is also by no means an obligatory list. One thing I will mention, I believe the Newburyport Library has friends. I apologize. I cannot remember if you have a foundation as well. Having somebody from the board be a liaison is often very good for the overall health of the library, because then the two groups can sort of keep an open line of communication. And if the library ever needs a more involved approach in advocacy, the Friends, as a 501c3 nonprofit, are generally in a much better position to do that. So I do want to talk a little bit about library policy, just because that's going to be one of your primary roles. It sounds like it already is, and it sounds like you are approaching it in the way that is generally recommended. But because they are like the set of documents that govern the operations of the library, and they do often tend to be pushed aside because, let's face it, urgent matters, more exciting matters, can definitely take priority. Policy is so essential to the success, the life, the staff, and the safety of the library. So it's extremely important to have policies that are current, actionable, and, as I mentioned earlier, and always will, legally defensible. So again, the roles in policy are going to be very similar to what I described in the previous slide. Ideally, you should be reviewing your policy binder piece by piece on a rotating basis to make sure that everything is relevant. In some cases, the chair does this. In some cases, there's a policy committee, and it may be in his role as both head librarian and board secretary. That may be something that Kevin does or is already doing. But the library is a very nimble organization, and as circumstances change, so should policy. So making a policy review a regular appearance on your meeting agenda is generally recommended. And it sounds like you've already established well that Kevin is your boots on the ground. He's going to be your eyes and ears for the daily operations, which means that he's going to be the one to have the best input in terms of drafting policy, because he's going to provide that professional expertise. But again, that's really where your perspectives in additionally informing that policy, especially as a community member and ideally as a library user, is going to come into play as well. So policy always works best when everybody has a hand in informing and creating that policy.
I jump in and just sort of legal note, this is not unique to Newburyport. Although actually your structure that I mentioned before with the trustees as a council, they have in some ways underscore many library boards and the sort of setup of libraries were set up in eras that had much fewer, many fewer folks sort of at the library as staff, and far fewer laws around HR, around risk, liability, insurance, et cetera. And so one thing that's when we advise towns, whether it's the library, this is also true of sort of other departments, as you're thinking about whether a policy sort of falls within something this board should really tackle, I try to think about, is it unique to the library or not? Right, so I certainly would not, from just a purely legal and liability risk perspective, advise all, HR policies, all policies around safety and security, right? Insurance, use of the library, some of those may fall under purview, but that they should be informed by what's generally happening at the city level, and some may just make more sense for Kevin to be able to manage his staff in the same way that's consistent with sort of the mayor's office generally and the city. So those are just things to think about as you're, which policies might feel totally ignored. You don't have to create all of it, just.
Yes, absolutely. And that's another really good reason why the city solicitor should really take a look at any library policies, because there's no need for you to be reinventing the wheel. If that policy already exists for the city and there is no specific circumstance where the library may be exception, HR policy is a big one for this. It's perfectly fine to go by what the city is offering. And in many cases, that's what should be taken under advisement. So yes, I'm wholeheartedly agreeing with Mina that these are, when I talk about the policy that governs the library that you will be voting on, those are very much library specific policies, things like collection development, patron rights and responsibilities. If you have a makerspace policies. I do also recommend a public comment policy. That's usually extremely helpful for the board in setting guardrails around public comment. But if any of you would like to have a conversation or a list of common policies that libraries often use, and that they probably should have as a double check in their policy binder, feel free to let me know. Although I've got a very sneaking suspicion that Kevin already has a really good handle on that. I'm a huge policy nerd, so I'm also always happy to talk about that pretty much at any time. So one last plug in terms of library specific policy. It makes a difference when allowing a library to operate smoothly and safely because it creates stability. It is actionable, it is consistent, and it helps build trust within the community. And that is a big part of that fiduciary responsibility of making sure that you are acting in the library's best interest, is a part of. So I always, whenever I talk to trustees, I always like to do a little bit of a plug for library policy, just because I think it is so foundational for setting the overall tenor of how those day-to-day operations go. But that is the end of my slides. I have my contact information here. I am here as a resource. I work with library administration. I work with library board members, friends, foundations regularly. I will never turn anybody away who comes to me asking for help or advice. I will certainly do the best I can. I may not always be the best person for that advice, in which case I will absolutely put you in touch with either one of my colleagues, for example, if there are any questions about things like your state aid award or what's involved in library certification, I would put you in touch with our state aid team. In some cases, I may have you go back to Kevin and say, you know what, this is very much an operational thing. You should probably be sorting it out with him. And in other cases, it just may be a legal matter where I refer you to the Division of Open Government, or I refer you to the Ethics Board. But I will always do my best to help you in whatever capacity I'm able to do so, or at the very least, put you in touch with the resources that you will need to be able to do to carry out your role as a trustee responsibly and as effectively as you possibly can. So I am more than happy to take any additional questions that may have come to mind. I will stop sharing my screen. Kevin and Mina both have copies of my slides. You are absolutely welcome to have copies of them as well. So feel free to distribute them. And yeah, if there are no questions, I am absolutely here as a resource for you.
Do you know what percentage of libraries in Massachusetts have bylaws that govern them?
The percentage,
Yeah.
it's not 100%. I'll tell you that. And it really should be. I would say probably based on, I don't have the actual statistics. It's not something that we collect statewide. Although our state aid review is coming up and I may put that in there. I may put that in there as a suggestion to say, does your board have bylaws in place? I would say a conservative estimate would probably be definitely more than half, probably closer to 70% of libraries have boards in place. But actually, just last week during my office hours, I had a trustee come to me saying, so how important is it for our library to have bylaws? To which I responded, extremely, and proceeded to lay out the reasons why it is so helpful to have bylaws. And I don't want to steal any of Mina's thunder because he is going to be talking about that. Just know that I wholeheartedly echo those sentiments. And I truly believe that bylaws are essential because there are going to be things that your city code does not cover. And a question is going to come up at some point of, well, what is the trustee's responsibility in doing this? What does Newburyport's Library Board of Directors do when this situation comes up? And if you don't have it laid out in your bylaws, that's going to leave it subject to a lot of different interpretations. And those interpretations are not always going to have the library's best interest at heart. And that is your job to put the library's best interest at heart. So making sure that those bylaws are laid out to say, hey, you know, as city code will allow us to do, here is what we intend to enact upon on behalf of the public library, can avoid a lot of potential confusion, potential power struggles. So yeah, it may not be 100% of libraries that have bylaws, but boy, howdy, do I wish it was.
Thank you.
And if you do want that specific number, I can see if I can find it. But like I said, I don't know if those are statistics that we collect. If they are, I'll shoot Kevin an email and let him know.
Very good. Thanks,
That is the
Ed.
difference between a librarian and a lawyer. Librarian will say, I'll find a statistic. The lawyer will say, it depends, and then give you a different. So, depends.
All right. Yeah, if there are no other questions right now, but you know, you sit bolt upright in bed at 3 o'clock in the morning and go, oh, I should have asked that while she was there. Don't worry. Email me. send me a message. Like I said, I'm here as a resource for you. My job exists to help all of you out. So it is never a bother. It is never an issue when somebody reaches out to me. So thank
Also, email me and I can forward it to Al.
Thank you.
you, Kevin.
Right.
All right.
So, Mr. Chair, I'll defer to you. Do we want to go straight to the next?
Absolutely.
All right, so Christina and I will cover, sort of two pieces that I mentioned. We heard a lot about governance and sort of the broad and how it normally works in Massachusetts. We're gonna dig into some of these, what's a little bit different about Newburyport first. And like I said, I'll end with more on the open meeting law. Please stop us, ask questions, correct us if you say, well, that's not how it has worked in the past, 20 years. So we can sort of talk. So, proceed.
And all right, and one more. One more.
All right. And I'm
The
Sorry,
exciting
bef-
part.
sorry, before you get started, I'm just gonna I am going to sign off so that I can put my kiddo to bed, but thank you all very much for your attention. Again, reach out if you have any questions, but thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, so in this first part, we're gonna have some answers to questions why things are the way they are, and I think that's super exciting. This library was founded by Josiah Little in 1854. He donates $5,000, which back then was a pretty big amount of money, to the city and to establish a library. And as it happened, the library became very, very popular. And so then they needed to secure a new building for the library to accommodate the growing interest in the library. And by September 1863, Edward Mosley, he launched a subscription campaign. He pledged $1,000 of his own. And then they raised over $18,000 in subscriptions. I believe they, well, I know they did a lecture series, and this is how they got the money. And then they purchased this building, which is known as the Treason House on State Street. So the building in 1865, the building was transferred to the city by a deed of trust. So this is what explains why things are set up the way they are in the ordinance. Because the deed of trust, that very old document, has very specific governance conditions. And this is why we have certain number of trustees. Feel free to, I'm not looking at you.
Yeah, that's
So what, a deed of trust is basically a legal document, you're transferring, just like if you buy a house. You're transferring the property in this building to the city, and you attach certain conditions.
Sorry.
And so here what brings us to this to why this library has this very unique governance structure. In a typical Massachusetts model, you will see a board of trustees who are usually like citizen volunteers. They directly govern the library. They do have custody and management of all of its affairs. Newburyport is a little bit different. The legal trusteeship, it resides in the mayor and city council. So basically, they have the ultimate legal ownership and authority and oversight of the library. But the ordinance delegates the operational governance to the board of directors. And the board of directors is entrusted with running day-to-day operations of the library, setting up policies, as Al mentioned, overseeing head librarian. But the board also includes 3 self-perpetuating trustee appointees. That would be what we refer to as the building. There you go. So that's it's by the terms of D. So here we got this dual layer sort of, or maybe like triple dual of structure that is not typically found in the standard Massachusetts governance model. And so, so what does the board of directors do in this in the situation of the Newburyport Library? It has operational governance, meaning setting up general policy of the library, collection management, making all purchases and exchanges of books. It's all in the code of ordinances, giving materials in good repair, personnel, overseeing personnel, prescribes librarian duties, and appoints the librarian. Usually, as you can see on that slide, usually hiring and evaluating the library director is a trustee responsibility. Rulemaking, that under the ordinances, board of directors has the power to pass bylaws. None are in place at the moment, but the board absolutely can. Determines fines and penalties, and then reports to city council at its first town meeting about the condition of the library, the books, expenditures, and any suggestions.
And as we transition to this next slide, that last part, that's a minimum. You know, that doesn't mean that, obviously, the invitation of council, the council could ask to see you more often, to talk a little bit more often, but that's just in ordinances.
So what the board does not control, legal trusteeship and general supervision remains in the mayor and city council. So the board operates within sort of like the authority that has been delegated to it. Trust fund stewardship is likewise rests with the trustees. And any surplus building fund rests with the three trust deed appointees. We spoke a little bit about municipal finance and appropriations. City council is responsible for appropriations, so board of directors does not do that. All of the fines and penalties are credited to the general fund, and the board does not retain those revenues or cannot appropriate those revenues independently.
Can you go back just for that?
Sorry, not my.
So top there, the board operates within the authority delegated to it. It does not possess institutional authority. And yet, we're responsible for evaluating the library director. So that's the.
Think about it as a stick of bundles, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah.
So in the normal, not normal, in the typical model. Board of trustees would have all of the stakes. Here, because of the deed of trust, they sort of were like pulled apart. So some of them are in the city council's control, right? And some of them are delegated to the board of directors. So that's what it means, that's what it means by ultimate institutional authority.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, just to add to that, and this, it is a more complicated one. I will say, although this is unique, almost every library I've worked with has had some version of this. A lot of libraries, because they're set up under a charitable trust, will have a sort of almost entirely nonprofit like quasi municipal entity. And then this town, usually towns, select board will be sort of the kind of administrative board kind of the library. In your case, what it means, as Christina said, is some things are sort of more clearly within the library board. And you know, and sort of by the way the ordinance is done, it's in a good sense, a lot of what the council has put in the ordinance to be done by the library board of directors is what would typically, as Al was describing earlier, be handled by the library, by the sort of direct supervision of the head library, the management of collections, etc. But you know, to be fair, there is a sort of higher layer, right, to it. And in theory, you know, a city council at some day could decide to change that. With some of those rules changing, you know, a bit. Some of that will be, and if, you know, so let's say the city council decides we want to make sure surplus building funds are dealt with by us. Well, then, as city solicitors, we look at that and say, probably can't do that one because that's in the terms of the trust, right, that came in. Other things, how you decide, if the city council wanted to decide they're going to automatically appropriate all revenues from fines and penalties. They could decide, suggesting you do or not, I'm just saying that's there are things that are more in their control to change. And things that aren't, it does leave some gray areas to be completely candid, and that's not, again, not just a Newbury issue, we see this in other towns. Where someone says, is that really a building issue, or is it a library management issue, or is it an HR issue? It might be all three. And so there is this need for coordination.
That was always my question with it, when I started digging into this a little bit, because typically city council is not involved in any kind of thing around operations, right? But well, in my head, city council's involvement would be more budget related, because they have overall over that.
And that is generally true the way that it's currently set up under the ordinance, and certainly under what has to stay with the trustees, which are the city council and you as the mayor. And that is a sort of more high level fiduciary duty to make sure that from year to year, the sort of library exists, to keep going. And it's sort of a little bit more background maintenance than it is hands-on operation.
Because you put it, preserving financial assets of the library, so it's. Okay. Well,
And I think we just sort of covered this as a summary of it. We could get into a lot of the nitty gritty of it. What I will also say is, one of the reasons when we were asked to do this, I reached out to Alice team just to have a conversation about how libraries typically function. These are sort of easy to say, hard to apply rules. Sort of the distinction between the broader fiduciary duty of the trustees versus the day-to-day of the directors, and kind of going a layer further, what the head librarian should do. It's a field that's evolved a lot since the 1860s, for lack of, it's just the obvious, I should say. And, our advice from a purely legal perspective, there's a lot of policy issues, a lot of, where the lines exactly are, but from a purely legal perspective, a lot of what Al was mentioning as sort of the way libraries typically run within those models actually makes a whole lot of sense and protects both the library's core functions, to be able to serve the public and provide a variety of information and in a neutral way that sort of is not dictated too much by politics or policy in the sense of what you provide. At the same time, to have the needs of the community in mind, right? So you don't want a library that it is entirely, Kevin, I'm sorry if this is you, but Kevin has decided that 18th century nail and screw making are the really important things to feature in the library and nothing else. He dedicates the entire collection center. We're going to not have a children's section, we're not going to have anything else. It's absolutely fair for the library directors to have that input. It's also fair for the council to say, we're not sure we want to fund this much of this one person's special. And so there is a little bit of a push and pull in these things, to have sort of a public oversight on it, as well as a professionalism, learned experience from elsewhere, especially because I think, as we all know, libraries today both incorporate a lot more technology, a lot more than just going out and buying a stack of books and making sure they're available. They also come with a lot more political pressures, external to Newburyport, external to really Massachusetts or anywhere else, and external to the folks that might want to weigh in, may have rights under the First Amendment, they may have rights under state law, or not, right? And so there's a whole lot of competing tensions, and in some ways, kind of comes back to what Al was talking about, that everything on paper may not be as clear, but ideally you have sort of a symbiotic relationship. Any questions about this piece? I'm going to cover the open meeting law part quickly, but or examples or thoughts on that. And I don't know that, actually, I think we put this at the. Very, and we did mention it here. On the point of bylaws, I think the question came up and you heard Al say it a few times. I think what I would suggest personally on bylaws is a lot of what you might want to think about to sort of organize how you function as a board or, and how you want to direct when and where you might make policy. Those are appropriate things for bylaws. I want to be clear though, I don't think you want to waste all your time writing bylaws or spend, be so rigid in your bylaws that it gets into, exactly what day of the month folks are, the board will meet. You have to change your bylaws to do that. Some bylaws have that, some don't. The things that are that granular. The other opportunity you have in the city is to ask for the city council to put some of the things you might have in a bylaw in an ordinance. My caution on that is not because the city council is not capable of that, but you would be competing for time, I'm sure, with a lot of other priorities. And the city council process by design is harder to change, right? It's not intended to be SPA, whereas a board can change its bylaws midway. And so one of the big distinctions of what you might put in the bylaw versus an ordinance might be what you sort of want to tie future generations to, unless they have a very good reason to change it, in which case they have to go back to the council to change it, versus what you might want to tie yourselves to in the way you work together, because it's working well right now and you want to document it. And future generations might keep it, but they don't have to, right? It's a lot easier. All right. Let's start with this one. Everybody, we can go. Yes.
So I'm sure everyone in this room is familiar with the open meeting law at this point, so we're gonna go over it real quick. If you have any questions, feel free to stop us. The basic purpose of the open meeting law is to ensure transparency in the operations on which public policy is based, right? So there are two competing interests here. Two balances two interests: the public's right to witness deliberation of public officials and the government's need to manage operations efficiently. And so who is covered under public as a public body under open meeting law? It's any government board committee that would include any multi-member board such as this one, any commission, any committee, any subcommittee, even those that exist purely for advisory purposes. Library boards most certainly qualify as public bodies, and so do subcommittees and committees. Those are all covered under the open meeting law.
I will say that last sentence though is doing quite a lot of work, because what is an advisory committee, what is a subcommittee can be very difficult to determine. So typically, and I guess for your sakes, if you have a loosely formed group of board members who volunteer to do a task, it may not be a formal subcommittee that needs to be there. If you have questions about that, I think I would direct them to Kevin. You can always reach out to the mayor's office to see if you want to ask us a question. I know Al mentioned talking to the Division of Open Government. They are a great resource, but just keep in mind that they are also the enforcing body. So whatever they tell you, you're going to have to be hard pressed to follow or not. And also they may not have all the time, right? Or the time to answer sort of within the context of how you're set up. The advisory committee piece can also be interesting. If somebody has a ability, an individual has the ability to make a decision on their own, a committee advising them may not be a formal subcommittee under the OML. Again, it sort of depends on how it's formed, and a lot of it has to do with the formality. I mentioned that because especially with whether it's in Kevin's role or in the mayor's role, in both cases you have sort of a unitary executive type role. And if Kevin pulls the three of you together and says, I just need to talk to somebody about how we're going to deal with this particular issue with the library, that's not necessarily formal, right? And so there's a little bit again of tension there. it's for lots, the reason it matters is because all subcommittees have to follow all the same rules as the union as a whole, and that, so if you establish a subcommittee more formally, you have to post meeting notices, you have to do all the things where, you know, quickly cover as requirements.
I think we, one example when, certain board members were meeting with a group of constituents, but informally, right? And then, that would not be a subcommittee.
Right. If you have less,
Just an informal, meeting, you're not making policy, you're not advising them, that would not be something. Certification requirement within 2 weeks of election appointment or when you swear in oath of office, every member must certify receipt of open meeting law materials, acknowledge understanding of the law's requirements and the consequences of violations, and must recertify upon re-election and reappointment. However, no recertification is needed when merely joining a subcommittee. The very three basics of open meeting law are public bodies must post notice of meetings. All meetings and deliberations must be open to the public unless a valid executive session purpose applies, which we will cover a little bit later. And the board must keep and post minutes in a timely fashion. So what is a meeting? A meeting is deliberation by a public body with respect to any matter within body's jurisdiction. The 4-question test you can use to determine if a gathering is a meeting within the meaning of the open meeting law. Is it between among members of the public body? Does it constitute a deliberation? Are you talking about policy that is subject to within the board jurisdiction? And does any statutory exception apply? Right, so if the answers questions 1 through 3 is a yes, and 4 is a no, then open meeting law applies, meaning that you will need to properly notice the meeting and open it to the public.
yeah, and I would just add, you may be wondering, well, what kind of statutory exceptions apply? Some of the key ones are scheduling. But if the chair says, can everybody make it on Tuesday? That's not, you have to, it would just be too convoluted, right, to not be able to schedule. So that is one. If you happen to show up in a social setting and there's more than a quorum of you, that is not. And again, you should be careful not to use that as an impromptu, caucus of conversation you might have, but it is not on its own meeting. The other one that sometimes comes up is trainings. So in theory, this is not necessarily a meeting. I will say the vast majority of times when boards want to have a training, we suggest they notice it anyway, because once you start talking about examples or things that might be within your purview, it gets really hard to say, are you training or in a meeting? However, as a library board, and this may be more relevant because libraries do tend to put on other kinds of trainings, right? Whatever else, library science or totally just community-based trainings, and those would normally not be.
So if you were meeting with a few members less than a quorum, is that not a problem?
It's usually not a problem, and I can cover this now. There's 2 things you have to be mindful of. One is a subcommittee, for sure I mentioned before. If that same group is meeting every 2 weeks and they sort of have the same topics, and delegated some authority by the full group, it may be a subcommittee, right? Not just a random. So that's one thing you have to worry about. Other thing is this idea, and it's a little bit harder to board this big. It's much more work for the council or some of the council committees that have 3 to 5 members. This idea of serial communication. So the way the open meeting law has been interpreted, this is a few slides later, but we can just cover it quickly. If a forum ends up sort of engaging in deliberation in parts, you tell Doug one thing and he passes it on to Steve and Steve passes it on to Kristen, and soon enough, you have a forum hearing it, that could be a problem, but three of you meet, or three of you show up to, you know, an event, that where the library's gonna have a booth or something, that's.
So if a couple of us go out to lunch or something and talk about it, is that a real issue?
Usually not. So again, this is where the social, that's sort of a mix of these things, so probably not a quorum, right? It's not it's a social situation, you know, you may end up talking about the library to some degree because you focus on that. Now, if all of you decide to have a celebratory lunch at the end of the year, think about whether or not that should be a meeting, and if not, you're gonna have to be much stricter about what you talk about as the topics. And you may deal with some public scrutiny on folks who may not believe that you stuck to non-jurisdictional topics, right? That's sort of where the relevant, right? 3 people in a committee that, if we said earlier, was about 11, 12 total, right? Yeah. Is that again, yeah, then, you know, you're not at the quorum.
And so, I mean, just to clarify, quorum in our sense would be 6.
It would be, yes, 6 plus 1, so 7. So it's majority, we have to make it.
Right, very, very.
So fewer than 7 could be,
Yeah.
is considered a conversation.
Yeah, unless exactly, some bylaws will define it differently for their own purpose, so there is a way to shift around that, but generally speaking, it's sort of enough folks to make it up out of the decisions.
And so, yeah, deliberation or communicating among board members covers all mediums. So this is something that many people do not realize, but it covers email, text, social media, chat, video calls. So if let's say seven board members have a group chat going on discussing library business, that would be a violation of the open meeting law, so be very careful with that. Mina already touched with the exemptions and the quorum. It's usually majority of the members unless bylaws find it.
We also.
Covered to keep track of serial killers.
Sorry, I thought we did.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah.
We did, yeah.
Okay.
That's my fault.
You're fishing. We've already covered that. Okay, so notice and posting requirements must be posted at least 40 hours in advance. And that's excluded Saturdays, Sundays, and legal holidays, so it's a business week sign. I coined that phrase, I don't know if that's a good one. But just so you understand, like if the meeting is happening on Tuesday, then must be notice must be filed by Thursday, you're skipping the weekend. And that's assuming Friday is a business day. If Friday is a legal holiday, then you go back 1 day. This is very important. There's an emergency exception, which allows you to post meetings as soon as reasonably possible. But most things are not emergencies. Like I do not know if we ever had an emergency to do without notice.
Yeah, I will say the one, so this is not an emergency, but I'm trying to think of things that might come up to the library. You know, this city council committee or you know, a zoning or planning board may have more of these that are closer. But the thing that is not an emergency but often gets mistaken for one is something that happened that day that seems really relevant to, you know, and it's all over the news or it's all over, you know, it's all over social media. And you know that it's not on your agenda. And generally speaking, those, you know, those things don't come up. It's true, but it's true emergency. Usually the test is, do you really have to act without giving 48 hours? The way that I usually recommend you deal with that, I mean, because again, we're all humans and the public are also humans and they're coming in and they want to know, what do you think? This thing is all over the news. The chair can say in the meeting, we're aware of X issue. Remember, scheduling is not something that's deliberation. I'd like to make sure that we talk about that as soon as possible. So we're not going to talk about it tonight, but let's talk about when we can talk about it. It's right. It's sort of limited to that. It lets the public know that you're aware of it. You know, a horrible accident. I hate to go with this, that happened at the library, and you know, it seems weird to be there, right? Or and not talk about it. It's okay to mention that and move on, but I would not transfer things into emergencies because they're an emergency to something. And that's not.
So, filing with the city clerk, do you then have to, in addition, post it somewhere?
So, correct me if I'm wrong, for those who have longer tenure in the city, that, city clerk does a whole lot of that. For most boards and committees, and Kevin will do some of that also.
Essentially, what we have to do is we have to post it on the city calendar as well as on the library board of directors page. So when we went, typically, that's where the city clerk has designated as the place that the populace will go to look for an agenda for a meeting is the city calendar. So that's where it is officially posted. And it has, it has to be posted for our meeting. It's posted on Friday because the meeting is Wednesday.
And I will say city clerks are in this, kind of a good transition to this topic, really good resources, here and elsewhere. Because they have to handle it for so many different boards, they often, I meet a lot of chairs who are starting out, they're like, what do I have to do? The first question is ask your staff person and the clerk, what do they need? And that usually answers the question.
And so the required contents of notice, obviously the date, time, and place, plus remote access instructions if applicable. I do believe the library provides remote participation opportunities to the public. The most important one on this list would probably be a list of topics that reasonably that the board anticipates discussing. They have to be specific enough so people understand what the conversation on the deliberation will be about. Like, for example, you can just say new collections, right?
Yeah. Unless a topic is should we have
new
new collections,
collections?
what should we? But if you're talking about a particular one, you shouldn't.
You do not have to go into every little detail, just enough information to inform the public.
I think the big one here is when we train folks, highly discourage, I know the AG's office does too. The sort of use of all other business or, you'll see older notices that would say, any other topic not reasonably anticipated. Well, it's not reasonably anticipated. It's either an emergency or it doesn't belong in an open meeting. So, that doesn't work. There's a little bit more leeway for something like the librarian's report, if you have something like that. Because that is sort of one-way information as opposed to something that might be deliberated on. But again, be mindful of that, right? A lot of times I see boards and committees where they'll have the staff person give, the planner's report or the mayor's report, and then folks will want to discuss it right then and there. And that may not be the appropriate forum if you sort of start getting in depth more than you sort of just information. I think there's events that are coming up here, issues we're going to talk about next.
Right, and if you do have to update the list of topics last minute, absolutely have to, you can do so, but AG strongly encourages that you postpone controversial topics until the next meeting. Or anything that would be of high interest to the public.
And so Kevin, for our board, do you prepare the agenda as opposed to the chair?
I send a proposed agenda out to the board, and I always instruct to please send me any items that you would like to see added or sometimes withdrawn.
And is that normally the order, Christina, is? Yeah, sorry, the head librarian would prepare that and share that with the board, or would that come from the chair?
I've seen both. I think, to be honest, in municipalities that are blessed with enough staff, that's a really good role for staff to have. A lot of places, there may, a lot of boards, there may just not be somebody to do that other than the chair. But I think it's usually a conversation between ultimately the chair and the library board, the library.
So if I came to the library and saw that all of the fiction was being replaced by, what was it, 18th century male books.
Yeah.
My choice would be I could approach Kevin himself and say, I'm really disappointed, or I could go to Jim and say, can we put this on the agenda to discuss our conversation on male books?
Yeah, you could do that, and and so this is and not to go too far down this,
Yeah.
down the path here, but. Jim could say, yeah, actually, with Kevin, we're not talking about that, we're not gonna waste our time talking about that, that's committed.
Okay.
That may be, that's where some tension can happen, right, because the chair or the person setting the agenda might say.
Yeah.
We're not gonna add this person's pet conversation.
Okay, yeah,
Right?
oh, yeah.
And what I would say is, for the chair, that's, I've not yet met a chair who wants to do that in a dictatorial fashion, because it's not a pleasant thing to do
Yeah.
with your volunteer time. So it's sort of usually a give and take, but it is a right that's sort of the upsetting the agenda.
Carolyn, I would do it for you.
Oh, great.
Have you ever seen a message board at a library which might say, we have a new John Grisham book, or we have a children's reading center opening next week, and is that something that could be considered?
Yeah, certainly, then this is sort of not necessarily something you would have to put on an open meeting law issue. You can certainly have a bulletin board that says, that explains upcoming events, upcoming elections, exciting sort of new materials that are there. We haven't put this in this particular training, but one of the things I find myself talking to library directors, library boards a lot, is the distinction about when the library is speaking and sort of what's called government speech in the First Amendment world, versus opening up a bulletin. And then that is sort of a separate issue, actually kind of related to one of our other ones later, so I'll just flag that it's related to this point about sort of public comment and public involvement in meetings. Something like that ideally would be managed by the library staff with input from the board. And that way it's the messaging of the library, as opposed to you have a sort of separate space where you want to open up a community space that, has, I don't want to say risks in a negative sense, it's risks in the sense that you have less control of it from the person.
Yeah, I think we're covered that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, we covered that, minutes that you will, eventually that posting must be, state date, time, place of meeting. And the summary of the discussion on each subject, again, it has to capture the substance of the discussion itself, so it has to be specific enough. And then, the decision is made on the record vote, so this is very important. No secret ballots ever, you need to put that in the meeting. So, I think that's how you say, right?
Yeah, I will say though, if everybody is present physically, you don't need to necessarily do a roll call, could do a sort of show.
As well, in open and executive sessions. And the approval must be timely, try to approve them within the next 3 meetings of 30 days, whichever is later. Public has access to minutes material, also materials that you review during the deliberations. And that would be under public records law, you must, which if you do receive a request, you have to comply within 10 calendar days.
And again, these are the kinds of things that it's good for you to be aware of, but keep in mind that unfortunately for Kevin and the clerk's office, that's really where those will come. And I know the city has a pretty robust system for tracking all public records requests and dealing with them, so that sort of becomes more routine for us.
So the way we do it is he prepares minutes and then they're approved for the amendments at the next meeting, which is like another month away.
That's a great practice. That's sort of the best practice. Sometimes folks leave them for a bunch later and then no one remembers what was said or what they want to change, and plus no one wants to sit there reading 30 pages of minutes.
Yeah.
Read, approve, post on the website.
That's it. All right, so executive session, so as Christina mentioned, there are purposes, there's only 10 purposes you can go into executive session for. We didn't list them out here because again, as a library board, you typically won't have that many different purposes as opposed to a city council or a lot of other sort of committees that might deal with exchanges of land or things like that. So first thing to figure out is if it's something you can do in executive session. A couple of sort of pitfalls of which topics sometimes folks believe can and can't be in an executive session. If you're talking about an individual and their character, their reputation, this does come up sometimes in libraries. Unfortunately, sometimes libraries have to no trespass somebody, etc. There are rules around that. However, in some cases, depending on what your discussion is going to be, the person may have a right to be there. And may have a right to receive 48 hours notice to be there. On the other hand, if you're filing any sort of formal complaint, taking enforcement action against somebody who's broken library rules, they may not have that same. So it's always good to know sort of what it is the chair reasonably anticipates, sort of the same standard again, will be talked about in executive session. Staff reviews and discipline are another one that comes up very frequently. Typically, conversations about, a difficult personal situation for a staff member, that's something that again may be subject to that first exception and first executive session purpose. General job performance is not. So this is often something boards of all kinds, but library boards included, struggle if they want to have a candid but fair conversation about the library director or a different staff member that they don't want to have in a broad session. You might be stuck doing it that way, unless it is sort of delegated to the chair to have the conversation one-on-one, and sort of it's not said that way, but that takes away from the public transparency. So it's a real balance there. However, a health issue involving a staff member who's going to have to go on leave for a while, and you need to talk about that. That is usually an appropriate purpose for executive session. If any individual, these are not limited to staff. So this would be true for library volunteers, it would be true for for patrons, etc. Again, these are sort of the things that might be difficult to sort of judge, and please feel free to reach out through the mayor's office, and they'll decide if it makes sense to reach out to us, or if the clerk knows the answer. Sometimes that is how we handle it. The other one that sometimes comes up are just politically sensitive topics. There's a discussion that's going to be that you're going to just have a lot of outcry, and you just want the space, candidly, to think about it without feeling like every word you say might be judged. More likely than not, that's going to have to be an open session, right? Whether or not to add a collection. Now, if it has sort of a threat of litigation to it, if there's an enforcement piece, that may be something that can be an executive session if you need to sort of think about a legal issue to it. It is, the purposes are, I think, something that comes with time of figuring out, what works for what. The other piece is sometimes it forces boards, my experience, to think, is this really something for the board to even handle, or is it appropriately for the library? And so, I mentioned earlier, I would not recommend that library boards set their own HR policies. And in some ways, that is because in the modern day, you have a mix of the open meeting law as well as protections for staff, appropriately so. And so having those two mixed together doesn't always make the most sense. And so actually that sort of appropriate delegation sometimes makes up for the lack of purposes.
If there's a litigation concern, is it, once the litigation concern goes away, does that now become public?
It's a great question. So this gets into forecast our next piece, executive session minutes. So short answer to that one is no. So executive session, you do have to keep minutes in executive session. The minutes, you do have to review them occasionally, and there's sort of the recommendation is if you're regularly having one executive session every meeting, you should be reviewing the last ones, but at a minimum, try to do it quarterly or something. That's it. The minutes or portions of them you want to keep private don't have to be released until the purpose of the executive session is done. So for your question, Jim, the key point is the purpose for the litigation exception is not to win or lose certainly moves to win that particular piece of litigation. Is to be able to give and receive candid feedback from counsel, right? From your solicitors, or, special solicitors. And that purpose, the courts have determined, does not go away just because that particular litigation. So if an opposing party knows that someday what's said in executive session will become public, then it's sort of no good to do an executive session because folks will still feel constrained. So on that particular one, kind of lasts indefinitely. There are other ones that can be harder, an appraisal. Because the library wants to buy a piece of property for a branch library and wants to talk to the mayor's office and the council, somebody from the council about appropriating money for it. You might go into executive session to discuss an acquisition of real estate and that strategy. The materials you used, exactly what was said, may or may not survive forever, depending on sort of that it reveals a broader strategy that's really specific.
Are there penalties for violating?
Yes,
Penalties, yeah.
and I don't think we included specific slides on, but there are penalties. There are sort of two layers, broadly speaking, of open meeting law violation penalties. There's a process. I did not not skipping that. There is a process by which any member of the public can file an open meeting. The way the system is set up, it really is driven towards compliance and correction rather than penalties. So a member of the public files a complaint, the board would have to meet on it within 14 business days and answer it within that 14 business days. You can delegate a response often, and then not all of them come to our office, but a lot of them, if there's any filed with the city, usually someone will let us know, determine whether there was really a violation or not. We assist that board and committee in answering, and then you have to talk about it, sort of acknowledge it in open session. Once that response goes back to the complainant, the Attorney General's office also gets a copy. They almost never do anything with it at that phase, but after a certain period of time has passed, the AG's office essentially asks the member of the public, are you satisfied with the answer you got? They have a right to appeal further to the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office does have the ability to issue fines, penalties, and take enforcement. The vast majority of cases, they do not do that. They might either explain the issue, if there was a technicality that was missed, because as you can see, this is not all intuitive. They might require training. They might sort of say, don't do that again. Really, the only times they issue penalties are for knowing and willful violations. Somebody was told, the city solicitor said in public session, you may not talk about this topic. The chair said, no, too bad, I'm doing it anyway. Somebody files a complaint, and even then, if a complaint's filed, there's usually plenty of time to correct yourself and say, we made a mistake, and the AG is looking for good faith compliance, not to penalize. There is a route to go to court as well, and it's exceedingly rare that it happens, but a certain number of resident citizens actually can go to court directly. Remote participation, this is one that we keep putting the slide, and then that date keeps moving forward. The legislature has not fully blessed remote participation forever, but it keeps extending it from the COVID days. Prior to COVID, there were really strict rules around remote participation. You really had to show a reason. You had to have some remote participation. Now it's more or less hybrid formats and remote formats are generally allowed. The biggest thing I think to remember, probably the only thing that's worth thinking about for a meeting this long with this many different things that we threw at you, is that all votes in when you have someone participating remotely should be a roll call. If something happens with technology, I guess it's more for the chair and staff, with technology during a session that was hybrid or remote, especially if it was hybrid, the rule is you can't keep continuing in the meeting. Sometimes good practice to acknowledge the issue or when it happened, so that there is a clear record that the board understands it if it was aware of it, and what accommodation you're going to make. But but you are not required if the public body can participate. You have a little feature for public to hear, as well as an in-person feature. You're not required to simply stop the meeting and try, have to reschedule just because the video feed cut out. There are some procedures for it again, of sort of how you get into it. The last one I do want to cover, I think, is the last slide, public attendance. All right, we'll start. Go on.
As we know, public may attend all open meetings, which is the purpose of open meeting law. But they can be excluded from executive sessions, and that we already covered. No one may address the body without the chair's permission. Chair may designate time for public comment. For example, chair may say if we're allocating 2 minutes per speaker and prohibit any disruptions. For example, if we're talking about topic A, but someone gets up and starts talking about topic B, chair would be within their rights to stop that comment immediately. Especially since topics that are not in the agenda cannot be discussed but by the public body. If someone is very disruptive, you can also remove them from the meeting, or you can ask police to remove them, which I would probably can help us here. AG encourages allowing as much public participation as time permits. Let's say the chair allocated 2 minutes per speaker and someone goes over that. If it's 3 minutes, then just allow it, let them speak. You cannot control what is being said on the topic. So that's the important part.
And just to add just on the content piece, and because this has come up in library boards across the state, and I'm not sure if it's come up quite as much here, but as a chair, and again, this puts a lot of pressure on the chair, but if any of you may be presiding over a particular meeting for whatever reasons, it's just good to know. My recommendation is generally, if you give somebody 2 minutes and they seem to be going off topic, you can gently try to redirect them to the topic, but I would strongly discourage sort of cutting them off or trying to correct a factual statement that they made. There's been a few cases in the past couple of years in Massachusetts that held that under the Massachusetts Declaration of Rights, which is really sort of analog to the Bill of Rights, and it's actually broader than the First Amendment on this topic. And so the ability to stand up, say something, even if you don't want to hear it, what I always say is those 2 minutes of painful listening are way better than 3 years of painful litigation over it. And so just, it's sort of a grin and bear it. Now, it doesn't mean that other board members can't, later ask to be recognized to correct the record. If someone said something awful, defamatory, we had this example with a school committee that we represent where someone made incredibly vile, racist, and sexist comments. The chair, I think, did the right thing. She sort of allowed it to be done, to finish, and then when it was over, made a comment to the effect that this does not reflect our culture, and sort of made her own comments, speaking for herself, and that doesn't shut down the debate. Now, so it's sort of a balance there. It comes up a bit more. It's related to, I know this was sort of a rash of what was called First Amendment audits that were happening in libraries. I don't know if you all had the good fortune of that.
Yes.
Where folks were trying to, this was mostly during the day as opposed to during board meetings, come in and sort of tape the public, tape public officials while doing their job with the suggestion that they had a First Amendment right to do so. It's on thin ground, but it's possible that they do. And that they could essentially say whatever they want into the tape. And our experience, whether it's that or Zoom bombing or rude comments, again, usually making it as boring as possible is going to make it go away faster rather than engaging into a back and forth that ends up becoming, sort of YouTube fodder or social media fodder. And I say all this as someone who may not personally be able to say, I'm not gonna talk back right now. So I, you know, we're all human, so don't, you know, beat yourself up if you find yourself in a moment where you have to jump
We kind of messed it up.
in.
And at the point, the public can record, but they must notify the chair by with reasonable and related requirements, and the chair must inform other attendees that the recording is occurring. All right, roll bylaw.
Before we do, any questions on open meeting? And it's been a lot since.
That's probably.
So our meetings are recorded anyway, and posted.
But someone might record separately and
Yeah.
apart from what you're doing and post to YouTube or social media.
And as long as the recording itself is not disruptive, usually.
They came in City Hall, they went in people's offices, like recorded right in their faces. It was like, it's happened like a couple different times over the last 4 years. Not too. Wasn't too bad.
All right, so we talked a lot about this. This was sort of shifting back to the first topic, and we thought we'd close here. And we've actually covered almost all of this, but you know, why bylaws matter and why you might want to consider them here. The basics are sort of an internal, internal operating. It gives you sort of a way to govern amongst yourself. And that's what you really should be focusing in bylaws on. The code of ordinances expressing powers of board to establish bylaws. My view is legally that any municipal board or committee could adopt them even without that authority, but it certainly helps to have that direct authority. And it sort of avoids sort of trying to figure out disputes on this spot. We can go to the next one. Reasons why we think it might make sense here. You do have this unusual structure, and you know, there's sort of gray areas between who does what. You have so the bylaws are a good place to clarify the voting rights. You know, for instance, I think Steve, you asked a question, do the ex officio members vote? It sounds like they have traditionally. And that's perfectly fine and actually makes sense based on the way the ordinance and the trust documents are written that they would vote. However, some people come from nonprofit boards or corporate boards where ex officio is sort of equivalent to non-voting. And what you don't want is 10 years from now, you know, somebody just deciding, well, the mayor wasn't supposed to vote on that, he's ex officio, or whoever it's right. So if that's something you want to preserve, it's always a good idea to kind of make that clear. As well as to set some procedural expectations. And as I said before, probably the biggest sales pitch I can give you for considering bylaws are they're just more new. And they sort of reflect this body as opposed to necessarily what the city wants you to do, which is the role of council and is sort of the appropriate role of council, as opposed to how this body wants to function. This is sort of just a little bit of a table of contents essentially. Membership and officers usually are detailed there. Again, sort of, you know, you do have this ordinance provision that the last headline area is the secretary. What does that mean? What do you know? How are you thinking the chair? You may not have had an issue of that. Some boards have issues of sort of how rotations happen, etc. One of the ones that just to tie back to the open meeting law piece is sort of this idea of committees. You're going to have final standing committees or how you form committees. I have found that actually being formal about how you form subcommittees helps you avoid accidentally forming subcommittees under the open meeting law when you don't need to, right? Or being accused of it. Because you can then point to it if someone says, hey, I saw the 4 of them at lunch. They seem to be talking about the new satellite network. That was a subcommittee. You can say, well, here's how we form subcommittees. No one thinks the 4 of us meeting is a subcommittee. And here are all the votes we've taken when we have formed subcommittees and how official it's. And that sort of helps out. And of course, I guess the last part, kind of the minor part of what's on the slide, sort of filling the boilerplate there. Make sure there's a way to like, it doesn't kind of lose the focus. Go to the next couple slides. So Al talked about this, so I don't know that we need to cover this one, but essentially, it's a piece of it that I would say treasurer is more common in library boards that have more of a financial function, so you may not need that quite as much. The last point is keep in mind, and this, because this is sometimes a concern I hear about folks doing bylaws, you know, is this really a role? Should we sort of follow with what we have? And that is true. I mean, the bylaws can supplement, but they can't contradict everything that's already in your city charter. The general laws, to the extent that they're not, you know, differentiated for Newbury Port, and the code of ordinances. So for instance, you can't change the setting of the charter. If folks want sort of longer or shorter, we have this in one of, I'll just use this example, one of the communities I represent. For whatever reason, the library trust said that they have to have all of the settled clergy of the community. This was in the 1800s, be a member of it. No one knows what settled clergy is. It's not like, you know, that there's unsettled clergy and settled clergy. We have no idea. We think it, the sort of. We are actually set up. So, you know, the folks there, well, you know, it's 2026. They have communities that might have a very large representation, but no congregation intent. So they have tried to figure out how to, you know, involve their interfaith community, but they still have to have on their board, you know, 3 members of the settled clergy of the town, which has been an interesting thing to try and jump. That's the kind of thing you can't change with bylaws. And you're really setting the subscribers, right? Like even if that no longer made sense, you would still have to have that role unless you change the trust documents, which is a whole. But bylaws can fill these operational gaps, so sort of how you do your job as a board and sort of how you function. And you know, probably said 4 or 5 times now, but you can, you know, they are more than. So I think that's it, and we'll just close with just keeping the next slide up. This is very high level summary of everything. And thank you for your amazing patience with so many topics and a very long presentation.
I just have one. Yeah, I think historically, of course, a lot of these duties that are being assigned to a subcommittee have just been delegated to the directors.
Yeah.
Which I think people are comfortable with. I'm not sure they necessarily take on the role of doing a lot of these things that traditional governance issue. And historically, it's been the case. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
So I mean, with all due respect for Kevin's free time, I think that's perfectly fine. You know, I guess I would just say, Kevin, I don't know if you have thoughts on for this public meeting, but I think the point that I would make is that I think actually a lot of modern libraries, but also just a lot of modern municipal departments have found the guys the case, right? And so these, you know, the structure, you know, what you don't necessarily need to form a subcommittee to figure out, you know, a collections policy or to even have it discussed. It is different board library directors. Again, my experience is more limited than Al's and towns that I have counsel for or that we work with on these issues. The library director often drives what they would like from their board and also the history, right? And some library directors and boards have a very good relationship where it's an advisory group that, although they do have the power to make policy, have a deference to the library director and sort of are there to help them think about issues as opposed to tell them what to do. They don't have the authority to, but that's not always the best working relationship. Because he spends much more time in this building, you know, managing this staff and has, you know, again, I don't know everybody's background, but probably a lot more training in this particular area. And that's not how appointees are necessarily. So, and there's nothing wrong. What I would say is if you find yourself, you know, as a group informally, seeming to small group formally, you know, doing the same kind of advising all the time, should at least wonder if it's a subcommittee so that you are following the strictures of the open meeting law, but that's not necessarily, you know, to say you have to.
I see a lot of like comparisons to the school committee.
Mhm.
You know, so we have a lot of, not a lot, but we have a couple of different subcommittees from there, but I mean. Policy is obviously the big one, I would say, so if that was something we wanted to just designate to Kevin and have a schedule maybe of like what. The policies are reviewed on a regular basis, and then, so now he's not doing it all at once, but he is bringing us like, you know, policy X, like to check out. You know, I mean, I'm sure you must get policy updates probably from the state maybe that are. Not really.
No.
We get them
No.
from from MBLC, we'll
Yeah.
have a,
Like-
for our collection development or our collections, like how long we can loan things out. Changes according to what MBLC has,
Okay.
so we
Yeah.
update the policy.
So stuff like
That'd be-
that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
we might need to bring it
Right.
to us, like, oh, hey, look, it's been recommended, because we get that all the time, the
Yeah.
Massachusetts school, school committee authority, like, has recommended this policy be updated to,
Correct.
and they usually give the language and stuff like that too, so, I mean, that might be one way to do policy.
And I'll just say on policy, sometimes it's a, you know, I liked hearing that Kevin sort of takes the lead in. You know, telling you we need a policy on an accident, here's a draft of it. Sometimes the biggest thing from my perspective that the board does is give the sort of. Support of a public body meeting a public session to that policy. Maybe there might be refinements or other things, but for instance, two of the towns that represented the longest are compliments and they seem to. Because of their history, they get a lot more attention on First Amendment issues and second. Issues than most. So when they have a First Amendment affecting policy in something, how my policy might happen in the library. The library director, I think, has appreciated having it go to the larger body, so it's not just somebody who is doing this in a private office and is responsible for it. There's a public discussion of why and how this policy. So things like that can really be a good use of this.
Can we get a copy of the?
Oh,
slide?
yeah.
I'll send everyone the slide decks of both presentations.
We also have a draft of bylaws, right, that's. a little
Yes.
old now, but, like, that's something we want to do.
Yes, we had started sort of suggesting some ideas of draft bylaws and we can certainly talk about that a little bit more. I don't know if we Kevin wants to get into that. Now, though, sort of a later meeting. With the bylaws. So that's what we had. We drafted them with these sort of ideas in mind.
Right.
You may decide it's too much, it's missing pieces, but
Has everybody seen this? This is, I mean, I feel like this is over this one. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was-
we don't got it.
Yeah, okay.
I'll send you another.
I mean, it might be something for a future
Yeah.
agenda item, if people want to take a look at it, and we can talk about it next time.
And I've also developed bylaws in my previous library, and I'm more than happy to share bylaws that I worked to help the board create. They're very simple. They didn't get very complex.
Have one question, but constantly referring to the chair.
Mhm.
And. In my 20+ years of.
Yeah.
It's all the chair has always been the person who belongs to,
yeah.
and, you know, there's no election, there's no nothing. Is that okay?
It certainly is, yeah, so there's really no.
Assets.
You have no problem.
They're all good, it's the same problem, I guess I should ask them, well, it's fine with me as long as it's fine with Jim. So we're saying,
But
it
that's something
is-
the bylaws could,
they-
board
yeah.
could say. Yeah.
Yeah, there's sort of pros and cons to it, right? And this, I will say, for boards where sort of that role. If that role gets misused, and there's not suggesting there's any evidence that if that role, somebody's sort of too heavy-handed with that. Not having in the bylaws a way that gets reconsidered at some point. Can mean that they're kind of stuck with, and you sometimes see in like larger political bodies, right, where. Until that person decides to no longer serve, they're sort of, they are that person you have to look to. Sometimes the sort of process of rotating chairs, I think is true for lots of boards and committees, not just libraries. Helps folks see all the different things that go into it, right? So because the chair might be talking more regularly with staff or with, you know, other parts of the city. other folks doing that might, benefit from it. But it was really nothing wrong with it, and again, in a board like a library where there's kind of understanding the history and background of the place and the organization might matter more than constant fresh perspective of the chair. There's pros and cons, right? Changing chairs every year, and say it's just like I live in Cambridge where our mayor is essentially elected from the council every year. It effectively means the mayor doesn't have much of a role. It's a very different, right? And so it doesn't lead to much utility for the town. So kind of goes.
Yeah, everyone else good?
Yeah, but did you want to talk about the draft bylaws tonight, or you want to have a special meeting for those? For bylaws, different,
Well, I'm not sure if everyone has had a chance to review the draft that was sent.
Yeah.
It was quite a while ago.
I would say let's circulate them again and let's.
Yeah.
Do the agenda item and so.
I think
Especially after this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some things, of course, we're not in a position to do it, figure out what kind of books to buy for them. My sister and my sister-in-law and niece were talking about this book. Theo and
Theo Golden.
yes, Theo Golden, my wife's.
It's
A great book, and you're really happy about it. I never read either are the authors, so I just want the Libby to see, and it's like 400 copies and 9 cents away for each copy. I just don't know. That's something much better left to the librarian. So do you want to go to the next topic then?
Excuse me.
Performance evaluation discussion, so.
Well, just, let's get late. I did bring out, so I did work on something. It is going to be electronic version, but I did print out one so everyone could take, so. We can absolutely take this on now, but no one's seen this, right, except for council president. If you want, we could also add this to the next agenda for September, and you can all take this home with you. But I think the way that I envision this, I and my assistant work on, it's essentially, it's a Google Doc that you would get a link for and then be able to fill all this out. And then what's great about this is similar to what we do at the school committee. It puts it all into one Excel sheet with all the comments afterwards, and so that can be shared. So, I mean, I guess we gotta maybe talk about how we would like to do that, if we want to decide on this next meeting and then maybe give everybody a month. And then come back at that final meeting with all these completed. I've been on the school committee for a little bit and been in charge of the evaluations for a little bit, and you always think you have a ton of time and then people are scrambling at the end to get them in. This isn't quite as in-depth. And we used, Kevin had sent along some information, but I went through a bunch of different sources and they did have some examples. And so we kind of use that as an incorporated in it.
And who all gets this? Does it go to the public? Does it just go to us? Does it go to?
So I think the final document would go to the public.
But I mean,
Well, even like this could be put on the website as
Yeah.
like, as a PDF, and so people could just see what everyone's filling out. But like I said, it would all go, everyone would get a link, only the people filling it out would get the link,
but who would be those people? Who would be filling it?
just the board.
Not the staff.
Staff doesn't get to fill it, no.
There have to be a public meeting, the discussion about the directors, like,
Yeah.
We better go to bed now. I'm ready.
That's my edit. My edit.
All these comments put together would be performance review.
No, well, I'll let you know, I'll pass this around first, so. But yes, there's topics, under which, head librarians are usually reviewed under, what is it, process. This isn't gonna work out. It's not as, cumbersome on that.
Okay.
I think they just put that in, but-
Wait, these are short answers.
You can do one, Kevin.
Okay.
Everyone right on? Okay.
To add to the meeting. Never mind.
I'm happy to send around the links to the resources too, but like this is the big one, was the short takes for trustees evaluating the library director, that's on the website. And then if you look on the, I don't know, but I'll send it to you this, one of them was from Real Mass. Which ironically is where my old chief of staff went, as I was trying to move forward, but they had, we kind of used theirs and a couple others as, the model. For what we put together. So again, I didn't get this out to everybody ahead of time, but you know, I do think we have time to review. You can get back to me with any edits you want, and then we can have a discussion and just kind of set up a time frame at our next meeting. That sounds good to everybody.
Next meeting is in 2 days. Next meeting of the library, right? Is it a Wednesday?
No.
No. So September 16th.
Yeah. No fair.
Oh.
I'm like, I don't have time to put the agenda up.
So we'd be discussing bylaws and performance evaluation at the next meeting?
I don't think we need to discuss this so much. I think if you take this now and send me your edits, and we can just talk about maybe what that process looks like, because then I'll have my assistant send the link to everybody to actually do it after that meeting. And then we'll say you have like 3 weeks to get it as a shift. Again, most of it is just, you know, clicking and putting it, but there is the opportunity for voice cautions, which you can choose to do if you want.
Right, is it 12 members that vote, or is it the?
Well, I don't think that's, without bylaws, I think everyone's. Yeah.
I don't think we're gonna change that vote.
Probably gotta at least put it in. Make sure we all agree on it, right?
So when would we be voting on the reappointment?
I think we should probably discuss that next meeting, but I think there's gonna be a certain time frame for everyone to fill it out, and then. I guess I can present the findings at the previous meeting, so it's gonna take us to October.
Okay, Kevin's contract is up for.
In November. Yeah, so it probably might not fall exactly along that. I think you have to decide when as a group we're going to, we want to decide at that next meeting. I guess you could in October, but I just think we need to put your all in. Yeah, first.
Good.
Next we're going to.
Anything else to come before the board? Any other questions or discussion? Items? I guess it's a motion to adjourn. So. Is that second?
Who got the
Any
second?
favor?
Was-
Oh,
The mayor moved and who seconded?
Steve, okay,
thank you.
Chris, we're fast.
Anybody have vote to adjourn? Wait.
Hold on.
Library votes is.
35 minutes.
And we still have somebody online or not. Our spot still.
Hold on.
Yeah.
We have to do it.
Oh, just do it on, it's just do a roll call.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, she's still there.
We do a roll call?
Yes, okay.
Sarah, you still there? Okay.
Yep.
To vote to adjourn, Mayor Sean Reardon,
Yes.
City Council President Heather Shand,
Yes.
James Connolly,
Yes.
Karen Cullinan,
Yes.
Gary Gorski,
Yes.
Dyke Hendrickson,
Yes.
Caroline McCarthy,
Yes.
Stephen Moore,
Yes.
Kristen Shea, Sarah Spalding,
Yes.
You're muted.
She's not,
Is there volume?
she's here.
I said
Oh,
yes.
my
Can you
phone.
hear me?
I'm so sorry. I was so worried about interrupting your talk. Sorry, Sarah, you can talk now.
Yes.
Worth it.
That's a yeah, okay.
Hold on, we're still being recorded.